Good morning, friends. This is your President, Mr. Raghavinder Das, Ronnie from All India Cantonment Bungalow Cum Resident Owners Association. I am visiting the YouTube after 3 months. Because of some Vedic Vastu, my office has had to be re-renovated and my directions had to be changed. So this is my 99th video, and this video will be covering a very important topic called Standard Table Rate, STR. Most of us must have heard it as an abbreviation, but do we actually know what and how this STR is made and derived out of? Well, this is the need of the hour because most of the leases in these cantonments are expiring, some have expired, and now the present regime is looking for a tremendous increase in this STR. So for that reason, please watch this video and understand, and if any question, you can call me back. So when and how was STR first influxed on us? We say these cantonments came up in 1800 or 1810. Let's say I talk about my Ambala, we were built in 1825. So we just completed this in this last week's Zoom session, and on the demand of people, I am coming back to the same topic of STR. When the First Cantonment Act 1864 was given to us, were we subjected to this word called STR? Did the military or the department at that time holding these cantonments influxed anything like this? No. In 1867, for the first time, the cantonments were given the status of a local self-government, and then the creation of a cantonment fund was done, and for this fund money was to be generated. And in 1867, it was an idea mooted that from all these old grand bungalows, there were no leases, please remember, because the Cantonment Code 1889 had not come. So from 1864 to 1867, we were influxed with this word STR or Cantonment Fund, but there was no procedure, no rules made for this. So how were we taxed? We were basically taxed under the Income Tax Act of 1866, under its section I think 21, that whatever annual rent we gained, we made income, we were taxed on it. I have evidence of it, of a bungalow in Ambala where the income tax notice was issued to it in 1865. So when did actually the tax start? Or actually the STR started coming in picture? For the first time when we were subjected under section 21 of 1880 Cantonment Act, house tax was to be made applicable, and it was notified for all the 55 cantonments. Similarly, under section 17 of 1889, so this house tax started coming in. And how was this house tax being calculated at that time? It was basically being calculated on an annual rental income, which was prior to 1864 also. So what I just mentioned earlier, section 21 is not section 21, it is under section 32 of the Income Tax 1886. So now we have to understand how things were going forward. 1910, 1912, where were these rules which were actually speaking on how STR has to be calculated and that house tax has to finally go to the Cantonment Fund? So till 1912 Cantonment Act, the STR was basically being calculated on the annual rent which we garnered from these built up estates, of which we are old grants. So if the property was within the bungalow area, or I would use the word outside civil area, the tax was 5%. For hill stations it was added, but if it was within the civil area, it was 3.5%. Now it is very important, were we being taxed or annual rent? Was it being taken on building alone, or was it, this statutory was defined in 1880 itself, that house tax will be charged on land along with building. So that has not changed till date. So once this rent was calculated and we were made to pay 5% or 3.5%. So this notification for every cantonment had to be done on the statutory, and this was very important, that the tax superintendent, who now speaks that we are charging you house tax only for built up estate, he is actually giving a frivolous statement. So friends, now let's come to the CLA rules in 1925. And parallelly in 1924, the Cantonment Act was, 1912 was abolished, and 1924 Cantonment Act was given. In this Cantonment Act, the local self-government regime was removed from the cantonment magistrate, and he was given a designated status of a cantonment executive officer. So we simultaneously got 1924 Cantonment Act, we simultaneously got the CLA rules in 1925, and in this rule, under section 10, for the first time standard table rent was defined. So this was again defined, that it was in particular rent on your built up estate along with land annually, which either the government would pay you or you will have to pay to the government. And of that we were paying house tax, and that was 5 and 3.5%. But nowhere in this STR it was defined how it has to be calculated. Was it to be calculated on land value, or was it in particularly to be calculated on just your built up value of the building? So this leverage was left open. Why was it left open? Basically, we old grant bungalows were revenue free grants, or we were rent free grants. Does any of your GGO, please ask yourself, does it define that you will pay some ground rent, whether it was of 1827, 1836 or 1838? No. Unlike the Nizam territory, where it was very clearly written that ground rent will be paid under the treaty. So we need to understand what was the mindset of the British Army or the officers or the Commander-in-Chief. Then when it started taxing us, then it finally wanted us to come under the regime of STR. Now this STR was basically calculated on annual rent. Now nowhere it defines how annual rent will be decided. So these calculations were left to the station commander power or the cantonment executive officer. He would define that, okay, Mr. A, your bungalow would go for 10 rupees per month, annually you make 120 rupees, so you pay us 5% or 3.5% on it. Now these CLA rules 1925, you will be shocked, under subpara 6 it said that bungalows which fell in category A1, B1 and B3, they were exempted from this STR calculation and house tax. Aren't we B3? Provided in B3 it gave a rider that the grant or the old grantee could prove that his grant was exempted from rent for lifelong. This is a separate question, but I will answer it on a later part. So ask yourself a very important question. Does anybody's GGO speaks that you will be paying some ground rent or rent? No. Only GGOs under army regulations are speaking of that. So rule 13 subpara 2 now calculates or gives you an example of calculation, but this rule 2 says that any lease which has to be made, which was made earlier in 1889, 1912 Cantonment Code, was to be made for 30 years, maximum 90 years. Rule 13.6 says no reserve price. Now what is this reserve price? Is to be disclosed to the buyer or the bidder for this leasehold property which the cantonment executive officer is going to finally give. Why? Because the Britishers were somewhere, hiding also something. So they didn't want to change these happenings which were in 1864 or what the old grant terms were. So they kept this bidding value of what will be the premium value or what would be the highest bidding value or where would the bid value start from. That discretion was with the station commander or the CO. Now rule 13.11, it speaks of how this market value has to be disclosed or whether it has not to be disclosed. But how it has to be calculated, that they have defined here. Now he has written under a formula, let's take 20 times the annual rent, which is fixed by the either two, CO or the station commander. Now this when is multiplied would be called the sale value or the reserve value. Now same 13.11 says, now let's say this lease is for 30 years. The annual rent, for example, is 230 rupees for your property. And the premium which the station commander has fixed is 1200 rupees. So what will be your base value or your collector rate or your STR? They simply said, let's multiply this annual rent by 20 times. So 20 into 230 makes it 4600. The second part of this formula was that since this property was given for 30 years, so let's take 20 times of the ratio divided by 30 years into the premium which the CO or the station commander has influxed into 1200. It comes out to be 800. When you club these two values of 4600 and 800, the value is 5400 STR of your property. Now will this STR in 1924, because the TP Act had already come of 1882, will this be the collector rate? That is a multi-million-dollar question. So this is where annual rent or premium value is again in 1925 hidden. Nowhere the CO or the station commander discloses this, that how it is reaching to this. So this STR, I may say is a collector rate, but I may not also, because it has not been clearly said. So friends, this is the first part of this video. I will continue in the second. Once again I am saying, remember we are all old grants. We were revenue free or rent free grants, never converted after 1765 or 1719 or 1812 or 1828 till last 1859 into new grants. So please remember and watch my videos. Thank you. Good day.